You're nothing but a cheap whore. Vivian's voice cracked as she lunged forward, her manicured nails clawing at the air between them. A gold-digging, backstabbing little whore. Before we continue, please, I urge you to subscribe to this channel, like this story, and after watching, please share with everyone. Thank you. Eve didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, her perfect lips curling into a smirk that could cut glass. Says the woman who literally paid me to screw her husband? What does that make you, Vivian? A pimp? A pathetic old fool? I trusted you with everything. My money, my plan, your plan? Eve laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Your idiotic plan to frame your own husband? You handed me a loaded gun and acted surprised when I pulled the trigger. That card, that beautiful black card with all those zeros, that was the smartest investment you ever made. Too bad it was in me. Vivian's face flushed crimson, her chest heaving. $120,000. You took every penny. You were supposed to use 10,000, maybe 15 if things got complicated. But you drained it, you little... And I'd do it again. Eve stepped closer, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor of what used to be Vivian's penthouse. You know what the best part is? Henry didn't even need seducing. He came to me like a starving dog. All those years with you, and he was just waiting for someone younger, prettier, someone who actually made him feel alive. The slap came fast, Vivian's palm connecting with Eve's cheek with a resounding crack. For a moment, the world stood still. Then Eve touched her face, her eyes darkening with something dangerous. You're going to regret that, you dried-up old hag. That confrontation had been 3 weeks ago, and Vivian still felt the phantom sting in her palm. Though it did nothing to soothe the gaping wound in her chest. She sat now in her sister Melissa's cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. A place that smelled of mothballs and regret. So far removed from the penthouse overlooking Central Park that it felt like a sick joke. The universe's punchline, and she was it. You need to eat something, Melissa said, setting down a bowl of soup that looked as depressing as Vivian felt. You've lost 15 pounds. You look like a skeleton in Chanel. Vivian pushed the bowl away. I look like what I am, a fool. It had started 6 months earlier, back when Vivian still had everything. Money, power, a husband she thought she owned as completely as she owned her shares in Montgomery Industries. She'd been 72 years old, with the kind of wealth that made people forgive the age lines. The gray hair she'd dyed platinum blonde. The slight tremor in her hands from too many martinis. Henry was 75, still handsome in that distinguished silver fox way, still sharp enough to run the company they'd built together over 47 years of marriage. But she'd noticed things. The way he'd started going to the gym again. The new cologne. The phone calls he'd taken his study with the door locked. Vivian had been young once too. Young and cunning, and she knew the signs. Henry was preparing for something, and she'd be damned if she'd let him divorce her first and leave her with whatever scraps the prenup allowed. She'd done the math. If she could prove infidelity, the prenup was void. She'd get half of everything. The company, the properties, the offshore accounts. Billions with a B. But she needed proof. And Henry was careful. Too careful. That's when Joyce, her yoga instructor, had mentioned her niece. She's stunning, Joyce had said, rolling out Vivian's mat. Like, model stunning. Just moved to the city. Needs work. Very. Finally. Motivated. The idea had formed like a virus, spreading through Vivian's mind until it consumed everything else. She'd pay this girl to seduce Henry, catch it on camera, and walk away with the life she'd earned. Simple, clean, foolproof. Eve had been everything Joyce promised and more. 26 years old, with legs that went on forever, and eyes that could melt steel. She'd met Vivian at a cafe in Tribeca, ordered a $6 coffee without blinking, and listened to the plan with the kind of focus that made Vivian believe she'd found a professional. 50,000 when you start, another 50 when I have the evidence, Vivian had said. You meet him at his club, strike up a conversation, let nature take its course. I'll have someone filming. Once we have what we need, you disappear. Eve had smiled, and in retrospect, Vivian should have recognized that smile for what it was. A predator sizing up prey. I'll need resources, Eve had said. Clothes, memberships, the right accessories. Men like Henry notice when things don't add up. Vivian had hesitated for maybe 3 seconds before sliding her emergency ATM card across the table. The account had $120,000 in it. Money she'd been squirreling away from her personal allowance for years. Private money, untraceable. Use what you need, Vivian had said. Be smart about it. Maybe 10,000 for clothes and such. The rest stays put until the job is done. Eve had held the card up to the light, like it was a precious gem. You can trust me, Vivian. I'm very good at my job. The first week had gone exactly according to plan. Eve joined Henry's golf club. She accidentally ended up in the steam room when he was there. She laughed at his jokes at the clubhouse bar. Vivian had received regular updates, selfies of Eve in $1,000 dresses, screenshots of flirty text exchanges, voice notes describing Henry's obvious interest. He's taking the bait, Eve had whispered in one message. Invited me to dinner next Tuesday. Some Italian place he says is private. Should I wear the red dress or the black? Vivian had felt a mixture of triumph and nausea. It was working. Henry was going to prove himself to be exactly what she'd suspected. A cheating old goat who didn't appreciate what he had. She'd take him for everything, and he'd deserve it. But then the messages had become less frequent. Eve stopped sending updates. When Vivian called, she got voicemail. Texts went unread. After 4 days of silence, Vivian had checked the ATM account. $0 and 0 cents. She'd stared at the screen of her phone, refreshing it over and over, certain there'd been a mistake. The transaction history read like a shopping spree for someone who'd won the lottery. Bergdorf Goodman, $14,000. Soho House membership, $8,000. Tiffany's, $22,000. Saint Laurent, $16,000. On and on and on until the account was sucked dry. Vivian had tried calling Eve immediately. Blocked. Instagram? Blocked. Facebook? Blocked. Email? Bounced back. The girl had vanished like smoke, taking Vivian's money and apparently her entire plan with her. That's when Henry had come home and asked for a divorce. I'm not going to pretend any more, Vivian, he'd said, standing in their bedroom with his hands in his pockets, looking almost apologetic. We've been going through the motions for years. I've met someone who makes me feel young again. Vivian had felt the floor drop out from under her. Who? Her name is Eve. She's wonderful, kind, funny, full of life. Everything I haven't felt in this marriage for a decade. The room had spun. Eve, I know it's sudden, but when you know, you know. I'm moving out tomorrow. My lawyers will be in touch about the settlement. Don't worry, I'll be fair. The prenup stands, but I'll make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of. Like she was some charity case. like she hadn't spent 47 years building that empire right alongside him. "You're making a mistake," Vivian had whispered. Henry had actually laughed. "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. I'm 75 years old, Vivian. How much time do I have left? I want to spend it being happy." He'd left the next morning with 3 suitcases and his grandfather's watch. A week later, Vivian had seen the photos on page 6. Henry Montgomery, billionaire industrialist, spotted canoodling with stunning young mystery woman at Nobu. The mystery woman wore a Tiffany bracelet Vivian recognized from the transaction history. Her transaction history. Her money, draped around the wrist of the woman who'd stolen her husband. The prenup had been ironclad. Vivian got the Park Avenue apartment, which was mortgaged. She got $5 million, which sounded like a lot, until the lawyers took their cut and the taxes came due. She got some jewelry and her personal effects. Henry got everything else. The company, the properties in Aspen and Miami and the Hamptons, the yacht, the art collection, the offshore accounts. Billions. Gone. And Eve? Eve got Henry. The apartment in the Hamptons had been the worst blow. Vivian had decorated every room herself, spent summers there for 30 years, hosted parties that made it into town and country. She'd watched the sunset from that deck 1,000 times, always with a glass of Sancerre in hand, always feeling like she'd won at life. Now someone else was watching those sunsets. Eve, probably. Eve in her bikinis. Eve with her young skin that didn't need filters. Eve laughing that tinkling laugh while Henry grilled steaks and pretended he was 30 again. "You're spiraling," Melissa said, sitting down across from Vivian with her own bowl of soup. "I can literally see you spiraling." "I created her," Vivian said, her voice hollow. "I found her. I funded her. I sent her right into his arms. I'm the architect of my own destruction." "You made a mistake. People make mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting to pick up milk. This was suicide by proxy. I handed that girl a knife and showed her exactly where to stab me." Melissa sighed, stirring her soup. "Have you thought about what you're going to do? The money won't last forever. Even $5 million runs out when you're living the way you're used to living." Vivian hadn't thought about it, couldn't think about it. The idea of getting a job at 72, of living within a budget, of shopping at TJ Maxx instead of Bergdorf's. It was incomprehensible. She was Vivian Montgomery. She didn't do normal. "I still have friends," Vivian said weakly. "Connections." "Your friends were Henry's friends," Melissa corrected gently. "His business partners' wives, his golf buddies' spouses. You think they're going to choose you over him, over the guy who still has all the money and power." She was right, of course. The phone had stopped ringing weeks ago. The invitations had dried up. Rachel Steinberg, who'd been Vivian's best friend for 20 years, had actually crossed the street to avoid her outside Bergdorf's last Tuesday. The message was clear. Vivian was out. Eve was in. "I want to destroy her," Vivian whispered. "I want to take everything from her the way she took everything from me." "And how exactly would you do that? You're broke. She's got Henry and all his money. She won. You lost. Those are just the facts." But Vivian couldn't accept that, wouldn't accept that. There had to be a way. Some angle she hadn't considered, some weakness she could exploit. Eve might have youth and beauty on her side, but Vivian had experience. She'd clawed her way up from nothing once before. Back when she was a secretary at Montgomery Industries and Henry was just the boss's son. She could do it again. She had to. period. Jack Donnelly was the kind of private investigator who worked out of a fourth-floor walk-up in Hell's Kitchen and charged $200 an hour, plus expenses. His office smelled like old coffee and broken dreams. And when Vivian walked in, 3 days after her conversation with Melissa, she felt like she'd stepped into a noir film where she was playing the desperate dame. "Mrs. Montgomery," Jack said, standing up from behind a desk that had seen better decades. He was maybe 50, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen things he couldn't unsee. "Your sister said you might be coming by. Melissa talks too much. She's worried about you. Says you're not eating, not sleeping. Says you're obsessed with this Eve situation." Vivian sat down in the cracked leather chair across from his desk. "I need to know everything about her. Where she came from, who she really is, what skeletons are in her closet." "Everyone has skeletons." Jack leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "That kind of investigation costs money. Real money. And from what I understand, your financial situation is somewhat constrained." "I can pay you." "With what?" "Your sister said—" "I have jewelry," Vivian interrupted. "A Cartier necklace Henry gave me for our 30th anniversary. It's worth at least $300,000. I can give you that." Jack studied her for a long moment. "You're serious about this?" "Deadly serious. That girl destroyed my life. She stole my money, stole my husband, stole my entire existence. I want to know who she really is, and I want to find a way to make her pay." "Revenge is expensive, Mrs. Montgomery, and it rarely makes people feel better." "Then it's a good thing I'm not looking to feel better. I'm looking to feel vindicated." Jack sighed, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "All right, give me everything you know about her. Full name, date of birth if you have it, any addresses, phone numbers, social media handles." Vivian realized with a sinking feeling that she knew almost nothing. Eve's full name was Eve Chen, or at least that's what she'd said. She'd claimed to be from California originally, San Francisco maybe, or was it Los Angeles? She'd gone to college somewhere, studied something. The details were fuzzy, because Vivian hadn't been interested in Eve's biography. She'd only been interested in Eve's ability to seduce her husband. "I don't have much," Vivian admitted. "Her aunt is Joyce Patterson. She teaches yoga at Serenity Studios on the Upper West Side." "That's a start," Jack scribbled on his pad. "What about Henry? Would he know more about her?" "I'm not exactly on speaking terms with my ex-husband." "Right. Well, I'll see what I can dig up. In the meantime, Mrs. Montgomery, you should prepare yourself for the possibility that there's nothing to find. Some people are exactly what they appear to be. Opportunistic, but not criminal. She saw a chance and took it. That's not illegal. Stealing $120,000 is illegal. Did you file a police report?" Vivian shifted uncomfortably. "No." "Why not?" "Because then I'd have to explain why I gave her the card in the first place, what I hired her to do. I'm not exactly innocent in all this." Jack nodded slowly. "So you want me to find dirt on her that you can use without implicating yourself. Tall order, but I'll see what I can do. Bring me that necklace tomorrow, and I'll get started." Vivian left his office, feeling marginally better. At least she was doing something, taking action, instead of just wallowing in Melissa's apartment, eating canned soup, and watching her old life play out on social media. Because Eve had unblocked her Instagram just long enough to post photos. Eve and Henry at a charity gala. Eve and Henry on the yacht. Eve and Henry kissing on what looked like a private beach. Each photo was a knife in Vivian's gut, but she couldn't stop looking. That night, she took the Cartier necklace out of its box and held it up to the light. Henry had given it to her at their anniversary party, in front of 200 guests at the plaza. He'd clasp it around her neck and whispered, 30 years with the most remarkable woman I've ever known. She'd believed him then, believed she was remarkable, believed their marriage was solid, believed she'd won. Now the necklace just felt heavy. She put it back in the box and decided to sleep on it. But sleep didn't come. Instead, she lay awake thinking about Billy and Willie, her twin grandsons from Henry's first marriage. They were 40 now, running different divisions of Montgomery Industries, both firmly under Henry's thumb. They'd sent flowers after the divorce, but hadn't called, hadn't taken her side. She couldn't blame them. Henry controlled their inheritance, their positions, their futures. But it still hurt. She thought about Greg, Henry's lawyer, who'd smiled sympathetically while handing her the divorce papers. It's generous, Mrs. Montgomery, more generous than the prenup requires. Mr. Montgomery really does want to be fair. Fair. There was nothing fair about any of this. Around 3 in the morning, Vivian's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw your profile on Instagram. Stunning jewelry in those old pics. Ever think about selling? I pay top dollar. Dimitri. She deleted it immediately, but it got her thinking. The necklace was just the beginning. She had other pieces, things Henry had given her over the years, things that represented milestones in a marriage that now felt like a lie. The sapphire earrings from their 20th anniversary. The diamond tennis bracelet from when Montgomery Industries went public. The emerald ring from their ruby anniversary. She could sell it all, liquidate everything, fund Jack's investigation, and use whatever was left to, what? Start over? At 72? With no skills except looking good in designer clothes and organizing charity events? The thought was paralyzing. By morning, Vivian had made a decision. She took the necklace to Jack's office, along with the sapphire earrings and the tennis bracelet. How much time will this buy me? She asked. Jack examined the pieces with the eye of someone who'd appraised a lot of jewelry in his career. 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm efficient. That enough time? It has to be. All right, I'll start with Joyce Patterson, see if the aunt knows more than she let on. Then I'll track Eve's digital footprint, see where she came from, who her associates are. If there's something ugly in her past, I'll find it. And if there isn't, Jack looked at her with something like pity. Then you'll have to accept that sometimes the bad guys win, Mrs. Montgomery. Sometimes life just isn't fair. But Vivian couldn't accept that. Wouldn't accept that. She'd spent 47 years playing by the rules, being the dutiful wife, supporting Henry's career at the expense of her own ambitions. She'd been a secretary with dreams of her own business, her own empire, but she'd set all that aside to be Mrs. Henry Montgomery, to raise his kids from his first marriage, to host his dinners, to smile for his cameras. And this was her reward? Exile to Queens and a rapidly dwindling bank account? No, she'd find a way to make Eve pay. She had to. 3 weeks later, Jack called with news. Found something interesting, he said. Can you come to the office? Vivian was there in 40 minutes, her heart pounding. Jack had a file folder on his desk, thick with papers. Eve Chen is not her real name, he said without preamble. She was born Evelyn Chenoweth in Reno, Nevada. Grew up in foster care after her mother OD'd when she was 6. Bounced around the system until she aged out at 18. That's sad, but not exactly criminal. Let me finish. She moved to Vegas, worked as a cocktail waitress at several casinos, got involved with a guy named Marcus Valente, small-time con artist. They ran a scheme targeting wealthy older men at the casinos. Eve would seduce them. Marcus would blackmail them. They made decent money until one of their marks died of a heart attack during an encounter with Eve. No charges were filed, but they left Vegas fast. Vivian leaned forward. Go on. Say. She surfaced in LA a year later, called herself Eve Chen, started working as a companion for wealthy men. Not prostitution exactly, more like a girlfriend experience. Got paid to attend events, look pretty, make the client feel young. Very high-end, very discreet. One of her clients was a movie producer named Harvey Goldstein. He fell hard, left his wife, gave Eve a condo in Beverly Hills. Then he found out she was still seeing other clients, lost his mind, and threatened to kill her. She got a restraining order and disappeared again. And now she's here with my husband. Your ex-husband, and yes, now she's here. Joyce Patterson is her aunt, but they weren't close until Eve showed up last year, needing a fresh start. Joyce probably had no idea about Eve's history when she mentioned her to you. Vivian felt a sick sort of triumph. This is perfect. This is exactly what I needed. We show Henry who she really is. He dumps her. She ends up with nothing. Jack shook his head slowly. It's not that simple. Why not? Because none of this is illegal. Immoral maybe, unsavory certainly, but not illegal. Eve hasn't broken any laws that we can prove. The Vegas thing was never prosecuted. The LA thing was just a business arrangement between consenting adults. You can't destroy someone's relationship by telling them their girlfriend used to date other rich guys. Henry probably already knows, or at least suspects. He doesn't care. Then what good is any of this? It's leverage, Mrs. Montgomery. Information. What you do with it is up to you. Vivian took the file and left, her mind racing. The plan came to Vivian at 4 in the morning, the way all truly terrible ideas do. She was lying in Melissa's guest room, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a judging face, when it hit her. If she couldn't turn Henry against Eve, she'd turn Eve against herself. She sat up, her heart racing with the kind of manic energy she hadn't felt since the early days of planning Eve's seduction of Henry. This time would be different. This time, she'd be smarter. This time, she'd win. The first step was getting close to Eve, which meant getting close to Henry. And the only way to get close to Henry was through Billy and Willie, the twin grandsons who'd been avoiding her calls. She dialed Billy's number at 7 in the morning, knowing he'd be at the gym. "Grandma?" He sounded surprised. "Is everything okay?" "I need to see you, both you and Willie. It's about your grandfather's will." That got his attention. Money always did. They met for lunch at a steakhouse in Midtown, both of them looking uncomfortable, in their identical navy suits. They'd always been Henry's boys, more interested in pleasing their grandfather than forming any real relationship with Vivian. But they were also pragmatic, and pragmatic people understood the value of hedging their bets. "Grandpa's will isn't any of your business anymore," Willie said, cutting into his ribeye with unnecessary force. "You're divorced. You got your settlement." "I'm not interested in the will for financial reasons," Vivian lied smoothly. "I'm interested because I care about this family, about you two, and I'm worried that Eve is going to convince Henry to change everything." The twins exchanged a glance. "Bingo." "What do you mean?" Billy asked carefully. "I mean she's young, beautiful, and very persuasive." How long do you think it'll take before she starts suggesting that Henry's resources would be better spent on, say, a foundation in her name, or a trust for the children she might give him? She's 26, Willie scoffed. Grandpa's 75. He's not having more kids. Maybe not biological children, but adoption, stepchildren from a previous relationship she hasn't mentioned. There are ways. And once she's his wife, which she will be soon if the engagement rumors are true, she'll have legal standing, community property, spousal rights. She could tie up his estate in courts for years. The twins were listening now, their stakes forgotten. Vivian pressed her advantage. I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm just asking you to be smart. Keep your eyes open. Pay attention to what she's doing, who she's talking to, where the money is going. Because I promise you, that girl is not interested in a happy retirement with your grandfather. She's interested in his bank account, and she won't stop until she's drained every penny. Like you tried to do? Willie asked pointedly. Vivian smiled, unbothered. I earned my share through 47 years of marriage. What has she earned through 6 months of sex? There's a difference, and you're smart enough to know it. She left them with that thought, planting seeds she hoped would grow into doubt. The twins might not love her, but they loved money, and the idea of Eve taking what they considered their inheritance would eat at them. She just had to be patient. Step 2 came 2 weeks later, when Vivian showed up at Serenity Studios for a yoga class. Joyce Patterson looked shocked to see her, then resigned, as if she'd been expecting this confrontation eventually. Vivian, Joyce said carefully, setting down her lavender eye pillow. I didn't know you were coming back to class. I need to talk to you about Eve. I figured. Look, I had no idea she would, Vivian interrupted, which was partially true. I'm here to warn you. Your niece is in over her head with Henry, and when this all falls apart, and it will, she's going to need someone to catch her. That someone should be you. Joyce frowned. What do you mean falls apart? Henry is 75 years old with a history of heart problems. His doctor has him on 3 different medications. His last physical showed elevated cholesterol and the beginning stages of peripheral artery disease. He could have a stroke, a heart attack, another health crisis at any moment. And when that happens, Eve is going to be alone in a world she doesn't understand, surrounded by Henry's children and grandchildren who resent her, fighting lawyers and accountants and financial advisors who want her gone. She's going to need family. It was all true, technically. Henry did have health issues, though they were well managed. But the way Vivian presented it made it sound like he was one bad shrimp cocktail away from death. You're trying to scare me, Joyce said. I'm trying to prepare you. Eve burned me, yes, but I don't want to see her destroyed. I want her to have a soft place to land when this fantasy life she's built comes crashing down. You're her aunt. You should be that place. Joyce looked uncertain, which was exactly what Vivian wanted. Another seed planted, another crack in Eve's foundation. Step 3 was the riskiest. Vivian hired a young actress named Rachel, different Rachel from her former friend, to approach Eve at her favorite coffee shop in Soho. Rachel was 28, gorgeous, and according to her headshot, had played Concerned Friend 2 in 3 separate Law & Order episodes. I need you to befriend her, Vivian instructed. Be casual about it. You're new to the city. You noticed her designer bag. You love her style. Girls like Eve respond to flattery. Once you're friends, I need you to plant some ideas. What kind of ideas? That Henry is controlling. That he's isolating her from her real friends. that he's trying to make her dependent on him financially, that she should protect herself by opening accounts in her own name, making sure she has her own money, her own resources. Make her paranoid. Rachel looked uncomfortable. This feels kind of manipulative. I'm paying you $5,000 for 2 months of coffee dates. You want to have opinions about ethics, or you want to make rent? Rachel took the job. For 6 weeks, Vivian waited. She sold more jewelry to pay Jack to keep tabs on Eve, to track her movements, to document everything. She sold her Hermes bag collection, her Chanel jackets, her Louboutin shoes. Piece by piece, she liquidated her old life to fund her revenge. And slowly, things started to shift. Billy called one night, his voice tight with anger. Grandpa's putting Eve on the board of the Montgomery Foundation. Said she has fresh perspectives on philanthropy. Can you believe that? She's never worked a day in her life, and now she's going to have control over $70 million in charitable funds. Willie called 2 days later. He's buying her a production company. Said she's always wanted to work in entertainment. A production company, Grandma. Do you know what those cost? And it's coming out of the corporate accounts, which means it's technically our money too. Joyce called crying. Eve hasn't returned my calls in 3 weeks. I think she's cutting me out of her life, now that she doesn't need me anymore. You were right about her. And Jack called with the best news of all. Rachel says Eve is getting anxious. She's been asking questions about prenups, about what would happen if Henry died, about whether she'd be entitled to his estate. She's starting to think about exit strategies. Perfect, Vivian breathed. That's perfect. But the perfection was short-lived. 2 days later, she saw the announcement in the Times. Henry Montgomery and Eve Chen were engaged. The wedding would be in 3 months. A small, intimate ceremony at the house in the Hamptons. Eve's ring was described as a 15-carat diamond, estimated value north of $2 million. Vivian felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling. An engagement meant lawyers, prenups, legal protections. Eve would be locked in, and there'd be nothing Vivian could do about it. Unless. The idea was so outrageous, so potentially disastrous, that Vivian knew it was her only option. She called Jack. I need you to find Marcus Valente, the con artist from Vegas. Why? Because I'm going to offer him a job. The same job I offered Eve. Seduce someone, collect evidence, get paid. Except this time, the target is Eve, and the evidence will be her cheating on Henry right before their wedding. Jack was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Montgomery, that's insane. Maybe, but Eve taught me something important. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to get what you want. She burned down my life. Now I'm going to burn down hers. And if it doesn't work, if she doesn't take the bait, then I'll be exactly where I am now. Broke, alone, and irrelevant. But if it does work, if I can prove to Henry that Eve is just another con artist looking for a payday, then maybe, just maybe, I can reclaim some small piece of the life she stole from me. This is going to cost you everything you have left. Vivian looked around Melissa's cramped apartment, at the life she'd been reduced to, at the future that stretched ahead of her like a prison sentence. Then it's a good thing I don't have much left to lose. Jack found Marcus Valente working as a bartender at a dive in Atlantic City. He was 42, still handsome in a rough sort of way, and, according to his record, he'd kept his nose clean since leaving Vegas. But everyone had a price, and Vivian was prepared to pay it. She met him at a diner in AC, sliding into the booth across from him, with her last Hermes scarf wrapped around her neck like armor. "You're the old lady looking for help with an ex-girlfriend," Marcus said, stirring sugar into coffee that looked like motor oil. "I'm the woman offering you $200,000 to spend 6 weeks seducing Eve Chen and getting her to cheat on her fiancé. What you do with that information is up to you." Marcus laughed. "200,000? Lady, you don't look like you have $200. I have jewelry, lots of it, and I have connections who can liquidate it quickly. You help me destroy Eve's engagement, you get paid. Simple as that." "Why? What did she do to you?" Vivian told him everything. The plan, the betrayal, the stolen money, the stolen husband. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back and smiled. "You know Eve and I have history, right? Your PI probably told you about Vegas." "He did." "So you know she's smart. Smarter than you, probably. Smarter than me, definitely. Whatever you're planning, she'll see it coming. Maybe. But you knew her when she was Evelyn Chenoweth, broke and desperate. I'm betting there's still some of that girl left inside the designer clothes and the billionaire fiancé. I'm betting you can reach her in ways Henry can't." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "This is crazy. Is that a yes or a no?" "That's a yes. But I want half up front, and I want to guarantee that if this goes south, you don't mention my name to anyone. I've got a good thing going here in AC, and I don't need complications." "Deal." They shook hands, and Vivian felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. This was going to work. It had to work. Marcus was good. Vivian had to give him that. He appeared in Eve's life like a ghost from her past, showing up at events he shouldn't have been able to access. Always with a plausible story. Always with that familiar smile that reminded Eve of who she used to be. Jack's surveillance showed them having coffee 3 days after Marcus's first approach. Then drinks. Then a long dinner at a restaurant in the village, where Henry would never think to look. Marcus played it perfectly. Not too eager, not too distant. Just present enough to remind Eve that before the penthouses and the diamonds, she'd been a girl from nowhere, with nothing, and Marcus had been the only person who'd understood. "She's wavering," Jack reported 2 weeks in. "Rachel says Eve's been distant lately, distracted. She's still going through the motions with Henry, the wedding planning, the social events, but her heart's not in it. Is she sleeping with Marcus? Can't confirm that yet, but they're spending a lot of time together, more than is appropriate for a woman about to get married." Vivian felt a dark satisfaction spreading through her chest. It was working. Eve was falling back into old patterns, old relationships, old mistakes. All Vivian needed was proof, and Henry would see Eve for exactly what she was, a con artist who'd never left the game. But then everything went wrong. Henry had a heart attack. Not a mild one. Not a warning shot across the bow. A massive cardiac event that left him in the ICU at Mount Sinai for 3 days, teetering between life and death. Eve was at his bedside constantly, looking genuinely devastated in a way that made Vivian's stomach turn. Billy and Willie were there too, along with Henry's sisters and various business associates. Vivian wasn't invited. She found out from a text message from Melissa, who'd heard it from a friend who'd seen it on the news. Henry Montgomery, billionaire industrialist, fights for life after heart attack. Fiancée Eve Chen keeps vigil. Vivian sat in the apartment, staring at her phone, feeling something she hadn't expected: guilt. She'd wished for Henry's downfall, for his embarrassment, for his pain. But she hadn't wished for this. Despite everything, 47 years didn't just disappear. She'd loved him once. Maybe she still did, in some twisted, complicated way. She called the hospital and was told she wasn't on the approved visitor list. She called Billy, who sent her to voicemail. She called Willie, who texted back, "Now's not the time, Grandma." She was shut out completely, left to refresh news sites obsessively, and piece together information from gossip columns. Henry was stable. Henry was improving. Henry was awake. Henry was expected to make a full recovery, but would need significant lifestyle changes. And through it all, Eve was there. Saint Eve, the devoted fiancée who never left his side. The woman who'd stolen Vivian's life was now being praised for her loyalty, her love, her selflessness. It was unbearable. When Henry was finally released from the hospital 3 weeks later, the engagement was still on. If anything, the near-death experience had made him more committed. The wedding was moved up to 1 month away. Henry gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal, where he said, "Eve reminded me what's important in life. Not the money, not the business, but the people you love. She's the best thing that ever happened to me." Vivian read the interview in Melissa's bathroom and threw up. Jack called the next day with worse news. Marcus is out. Says Eve ended things with him after Henry's heart attack. Told him she realized what really mattered. He wants his money, and he's done. He didn't get the evidence. There is no evidence, Mrs. Montgomery. She didn't sleep with him. Didn't do anything that could be used against her. She's clean. Nobody's clean. Maybe not. But she's smart enough not to leave evidence. I'm sorry. You gambled, and you lost. Vivian hung up and looked around the apartment. She'd sold everything. The jewelry, the designer clothes, the few valuable pieces of art Henry had let her keep. She'd spent over $300,000 on an investigation that had yielded nothing, a revenge plot that had failed spectacularly, and a future that looked even bleaker than before. She was 72 years old, with less than $100,000 to her name. No husband, no home, no prospects. Eve had won. Completely, totally, unequivocally won. The wedding happened on a Saturday in early June. Vivian saw the photos on Instagram. Eve in a custom Vera Wang gown. Henry looking older, but happy. The ceremony on the beach at sunset. The Hamptons house, Vivian's house, decorated with 10,000 white roses. A string quartet playing Mozart. Guests in designer everything, toasting the happy couple with Cristal. And in every photo, Eve looked radiant. Not like a con artist who'd pulled off the ultimate score, but like a woman genuinely in love. Maybe that was the final twist. Maybe Eve had actually fallen for Henry. Maybe this had stopped being a con and become something real. Or maybe Eve was just that good an actress. Vivian closed Instagram and looked at Melissa, who was watching her with concern. "You okay?" "No," Vivian said honestly. "I'm not okay. I spent 47 years building a life, and I destroyed it in 6 months because I was too proud, too stupid, and too vindictive to see what was right in front of me. I created Eve. I trained her, funded her, and sent her into Henry's life. I'm not the victim here. I'm the villain." "You're not a villain. You're human. I'm a cautionary tale about what happens when you try to manipulate people and situations to get what you want. The universe doesn't like that. Karma doesn't like that. And eventually, it all comes back around." Melissa squeezed her hand. "So what are you going to do now?" Vivian thought about that, really thought about it. She could keep fighting, keep plotting, keep trying to tear down Eve and reclaim some piece of her old life. Or she could accept that some battles can't be won. Some mistakes can't be fixed. And sometimes the only way forward is to let go. "I'm going to get a job," Vivian said finally. "Maybe at a boutique. Maybe doing event planning. Something that uses the skills I have. I'm going to live within my means. I'm going to stop checking Eve's Instagram. And I'm going to try, really try, to build a new life. Not the life I had, not the life I wanted, but the life I've got." That sounds healthy. It sounds terrible. But it's all I have left. 3 months later, Vivian was working at a high-end consignment shop in Tribeca, helping wealthy women sell their designer clothes. The irony wasn't lost on her. She rented a small studio in Brooklyn, rode the subway, bought her coffee at bodegas instead of artisanal cafes. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what she'd imagined for her 70s. But it was hers. She stopped following Eve on social media. Stopped asking Billy and Willie about Henry. Stopped trying to keep tabs on a life that was no longer hers to monitor. Some days were harder than others. Some days she'd see a couple in their 70s walking through the park, holding hands and laughing, and she'd feel a grief so profound it took her breath away. But other days, she felt something close to peace. She'd learned a terrible lesson, paid a catastrophic price, but she'd survived. At 72, that was something. The last time Vivian heard about Eve was 6 months after the wedding. Melissa mentioned casually that Henry had made Eve CEO of the Montgomery Foundation, giving her control over philanthropic investments worth hundreds of millions. Eve was being profiled in Forbes as one of the rising stars in charitable giving, praised for her innovative approach and genuine passion for helping others. Vivian nodded and said nothing. What was there to say? Eve had won everything. The money, the status, the respectability, the love. She'd transformed from a con artist into a legitimate powerhouse, all because Vivian had handed her the opportunity. If there was a moral to this story, Vivian thought, it was this: be careful who you weaponize, because sometimes the weapon turns around and destroys you instead. Have you ever made a decision you regretted? A choice that changed everything? Drop your story in the comments. And if this tale of revenge gone wrong resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the best lessons are the hardest ones.